and welcome. You're tuned into the best in paranormal podcasting. This is Darkness Radio. I'm your host, Dave Schrader. Along with me, as always, Tim Dennis. Hello, Tim.
Hi there.
You know, a few weeks back when we were doing Supernatural News, we read an article, Mystery of Time. Paranormal researcher says thousands of people trapped in the past. And I was fascinated. This is something that you and I have talked about for years on the show with the idea of time slip phenomena. Mm-hmm. And where do all these people go that suddenly vanish without a trace? I said, wouldn't it be interesting to look at people in contemporary time that have vanished and then look in the past to see if there is anybody that's shown up that has no connection to anybody, is ranting about, you know, coming from the future, anything, and see if we could find these connections in the news. Are people lost in time? And that's been a big fascination for me. And this entire article really dug deep into it. And the name that popped up was popular paranormal researcher Rodney Davies. He believes that the phenomena of time slips that allow people to travel across time could be real. Believes it. He's also written a book, Time Slips, Journeys into the Past and the Future. We have a link up for that book, so you can find it on today's program guide. Joining us on the program right now, Rodney Davies. He's written about the paranormal and strange occurrences for over 30 years. He is now one of the best-known authors in the field. And after graduating from university, he taught biology before joining a Montreal publishing company to begin his literary career. He's had 18 books published, several of which have become bestsellers. Welcome to the show today, sir. Thank you for being here with us.
Hello, Dave. It's nice to be here.
This is fascinating. Obviously, the concept of time travel, the concept of time slip phenomena has been gaining more and more popularity through the time, and especially in the field of paranormal research, people are trying to understand what exactly is a ghost, what are UFOs, what are Bigfoot and cryptid creatures. Are these really beings and disincarnate souls, or are we dealing with strange aspects of our own living existence and slips in time? So it's fascinating for us to get a chance to pick your brain about this and discuss. But if you don't mind, I'd like to start with the concept of ghosts. We've been to so many haunted locations, Mr. Davies, that seems like the intelligence of these hauntings is in a way that it's almost like we're haunting the past. What do you make of that concept? Could we be not necessarily disincarnate souls that people in the past are experiencing, therefore their house is haunted? Could their ghosts to us be nothing more than time slip phenomena as well?
Well, that is certainly possible. And I believe I touched upon it in the book I've written about time slips. It's a bit difficult to say because I believe, as many others do, that although we have our normal physical body, which we're well aware of while we're alive, we also have within us what we might call our soul form, which at the death of the physical body can separate itself out from it and progresses into another dimension of being after the physical body has died, so that these now normally the soul form remains in the vicinity of the body for a few hours, sometimes for a few days after the physical body has died. Because I think at first it's rather surprised about what has happened to it, and when it sees its dead physical self, it's not entirely sure about where it should go or what it should do until it receives perhaps some information from what we might call a higher power. So, but sometimes when people have lived reprehensible lives, the information about where they should go next is not imparted to them. And they're the people that become what we call as ghosts, that remain in the place or near the place where their physical body died, and are rather, in a sense, kept there. And they may exist there for or a long time, years, sometimes even for centuries, and sometimes seen by people that go to that same locality, and they manifest then as a ghost. But in due course, all such people do move on to another realm of being, which you might call the beyond, and then the person will get some sort of will enter the next development of their existence. They may get perhaps some sort of punishment if they've committed some grave crime, or they may be then allowed to go further into the beyond and eventually reach what I have called, if I might just mention without sounding, what I call the light world.
No,
I've just written a novel.
That sounds fascinating. Yeah, I don't think any of us would would think that sounds crazy, especially on this show. But please talk to us a little bit about the light world. What exactly is that, or your definition?
Well, when people go to the next realm, I think that there are probably two sections to it. We might call the light world, which is infused with light, and the dark world, which has no light at all, but which, or at least that's not what people can initially see. Now, in the light world, it has a geography or a landscape. And the landscape, and I say this because if you'll excuse me mentioning this, I've just written a book called Don't Frighten the Flamingos, which is a novel about this happening to two of the main characters in it. And they go to the light world, which consists essentially of a very wide expanse or pasture, like a grassland, which has a number of flowering plants growing among the grass. So it's very pretty in that respect, and it's gently hilly, but you can walk in it for miles and miles and miles. In fact, it has an endless dimension, and if you're not going to go any further from that, you are obliged to remain there.
Do you
For
in this
the rest of your existence? So
right now existing in that realm, though, do you believe
the equivalent of what we might call heaven?
Yes, I was saying, do you believe that this other existence allows for back and forth travel between that realm and our realm and interaction?
Well, I think that once you get to the light world, you probably stay there. But if you go to the dark world, which is sort of underneath it, but not, if you know what I mean, you can get to it the dark world quite easily, but its surface upon which you would walk or move is just a short way from the light world. So it's sort of the underneath of the light world. But if you go through the soil surface or the grass surface of the light world, you enter the dark world, and people that have behaved badly in life go to the dark world, and they are obliged to walk around there for years and years, or certainly for a long time, before they get the opportunity of either going to an even worse place or coming back and being reborn again in this world and having to go through another earthly existence again before they get the chance of hopefully living a better life and going to the light world. Now, the light world uh, has within it what we might call the tree of all things. And this is a tree which grows in the light world, and it is the way through. If you can touch it, you can pass through it, if you've been sufficiently good, that is, into what we might call the realm of light, which is an even brighter place, which doesn't contain any material forms. So it's a world completely of spirit and light in the spirit. And that I think will be really called heaven, rather than the light world, which is the preparatory stage to heaven.
It's a fascinating insight to it. We're always trying to understand, right, what consciousness does, what it is, where it resides, and how it can move through this universe. Time travel itself, do you believe that it exists in the physical form where we as humans can move back and forth, or do you believe it's more of a conscious maneuver? It's something that we can move through more in a thought process.
No, I think that people can move physically through time. It doesn't happen very often for people to have a time slip, but when the conditions are somehow right for it to occur, it will occur. Now, I had what I believe was a time slip experience in 2014 when I was living in North London. I just moved to this area, and about the end of the first or second week, I was walking back to where I was staying at the time, and I came across a policeman. And he was standing in a shop doorway, and he was dressed in a police cape, a typical British police helmet, and the dark trousers, of course, and black boots. And when I passed him, we both looked at one another, and I thought, goodness me, he looks odd. And he looked at me as though he wasn't quite sure where he was. And I walked by, and it was only some days later, which I thought, and I wonder if that particular person had found himself in a wrong time. But he might well have been transported from 60 or 70 years earlier, right, into the high street along which I was walking, and he was looking at me as though he wanted to speak to me and say, "Can you tell me where I am?"
Right.
And I should have spoken to him and said something about him, because I just thought at the time that he was dressed like that because that was how police in that particular area of London normally dressed.
Right.
I didn't know that the trouble with police nowadays, they all look like postmen. They wear these peaked hats, and they don't look like policemen anymore, at least the policemen that we used to have in England with capes. And so I rather think I might possibly have come across a time slip policeman who was standing in a shop doorway, and it was a shop doorway of a shop which wasn't in business then, looking at me as though he wanted to say, "Can you tell me what's happened to me?"
Do you think for a brief moment you were in his time era, or do you believe he was in your time era? Because I know that in some of the claims we've heard on the show, it can be one or the other. It appears that sometimes that slip happens and you find yourself there briefly, or vice versa. What do you think took place in your instance?
I think in my instance, he was time slipped into my time. That's why he was looking rather uneasy about where he was. And the thing is that I went in the following few days and weeks. I went around and looking to see if I could find anybody who'd also seen him. And there was a sweet shop opposite, and I said to them, "Did you see that policeman who was standing there a week ago, or however long it was?" And they said, "No, we didn't see anybody at all." So it's still a mystery. Now, for all I know, he might have been a person of 2014 who just dressed up one day into an old-fashioned police uniform and took a walk in the street, and then stood in a shop doorway. I mean, I don't know that he had time slipped himself, but I think it is possible that might have happened.
Right, but you said you had the sense from the confusion and just the moment that it was definitely something a little bit more out of time. Do you think that there's enough proof that we do bump into these timelines from time to time, that it's not just anecdotal, but that there is real science behind these instances, and that, it's not just always misunderstandings, which we understand there are going to be some, and you're obviously looking at your experience through a skeptical lens as well.
Yes.
But what do you believe? Do you believe that we are truly having these moments of time interweaving and blending and sometimes snapping, and we enter these different realms, or they enter ours?
Well, one of the things I do think is that our existence, I mean, we're used to living in what we call now, this present moment, and we think that it is a constantly evolving present moment, and that nothing else exists. But it seems to me that both the past and the future exist concurrently with our present, so that we can both travel back into the past and forward into the future, and that the future has already occurred, so that we are, in a sense, on a route that we just happen to be following as living beings at this moment of time.
When you hear about UFO phenomena, there's a lot of thought behind the fact that these beings, these craft, might be us from the future. Do you put any stock into that concept? Do you believe that is most likely what's going on, or are we being visited from aliens from outer space, or maybe interdimensional beings, or is it perhaps all happening at once?
Well, I'm sure it is all happening at once. But with regards to UFOs, it's very difficult to understand how they would be able to travel for so far if they have come from remote planetary systems, because the length of time in which they would have to spend traveling through space to get to us would be impossible to imagine how they could stand being stuck in their spacecraft for years upon years and years. I mean,
it's interesting, right? That's kind of the concept that confuses and confounds us. Yet, if we believe in the possibility of time travel and that exists, then the concept that aliens moving from one end of the universe to the other in a matter of moments shouldn't be that far out of the same paradigm or lexicon of thought process, right? Because if time can be manipulated, the concept of how long it would take to get from Zeta Reticuli to our planet should be theoretically shortened, because if they're able to do what we can do, and if time travel is a possibility, are they in fact traveling through a time hole, through a wormhole or time bubble as well?
Yes, well, that is possible, and I really don't know about that, but it's an extremely intriguing possibility. But I can't really say more about UFOs than I've already said, because I haven't spent too much time looking at them.
Oh, and I understand. I just didn't know if, what your thoughts were on something like this, especially with, the concept of time travel. Are we dealing with different aspects of these things blending in and what we assume are separate categories in the paranormal? Ghosts, UFOs, cryptid creatures, time phenomena. Are they really all just one? Are we seeing Bigfoot briefly because he's slipping through time, or we're stepping into his realm for a few moments? UFOs, ghosts, all that same thing. It all seems like it could be interconnected and have more to do with time phenomena than it does with physical phenomena.
Yes. Now, Bigfoot is a very interesting creature, I must admit, and I believe quite a lot of time has been spent searching for examples of him. But there was a lot of information about him a few years ago, I seem to remember, but I don't know whether they ever found any actual existence of him, did they? The searchers.
Yeah. Theoretic, there's a lot of interesting video footage and photographic footage. There's a bunch of hair samples, scat, and things that seem to be debunked, and some that have yet to be tested because of the financial parameters. But there's different aspects of that taking place. Let's talking about time itself as kind of a manifestation of matter and consciousness. What is the proper definition of what time is and how it works, at least in your estimation?
Well, that's a very good question, Dave. But it seems to me that time is a function of matter, but when observed by consciousness. In other words, when consciousness observes matter changing, different rates in which items of matter perform that becomes time as far as consciousness is concerned. So in other words, there is no time without consciousness, and in fact, neither is there anything else without consciousness. So that time didn't really exist until we, who are living creatures now, made of matter, evolved ourselves from the bare or the rudimentary matter of which our planet was made. So we have sort of dug ourselves out of the ground, if we can put it like that, and have become conscious beings. I mean, not just ourselves, but all other creatures too, who have a consciousness just as we do, although it might be on a slightly different scale. But they are sensitive to their surroundings, to what happens to them, and they can probably, to a certain extent at least, reflect upon it. And they are very conscious of time passing, because each day and nights pass. And in fact, when we think about time, we only have to think of 1 million years, which when we just say 1 million years, we think, oh, that doesn't sound very long. But then we think that each 1 million year period contains 365 million days and nights, which is an extraordinarily long time, and which it gives creatures like ourselves a chance to change and evolve.
Well, in examining how time works and what's going on with it, obviously time is something that man has created in a sense. Obviously time passes whether there's man or not involved, but we have made it more of a construct and a form. And
yes, we have.
Right. But in that aspect, then how do we break those barriers to allow us to master time more effectively?
Well, if you're talking about time slips, that is the great mystery, which we do not know the answer to. How is it that people can find themselves in another time, both going back in the past and in the future? We just don't know how it happens. It's just when the moment is somehow right for it to occur that it manages to occur. Can I tell you of one instance of
yes, please, of course.
Two English couples who lived in Dover, which is a town on the south coast of England, decided to drive 1 year to Spain. It was, in fact, in 1979, in October 1979. So they set off by car and they drove through France, and they were getting into the south of France, and they were driving along an autoroute, which is a motorway, an autoroute called the Montelimar Nord autoroute, heading for Spain, and they were trying to find somewhere to stay for the night. And they stopped at one or two motels on the autoroute, which were full up. So they decided, as it was getting late, quite late in the evening, that they would leave the autoroute, and they found a narrow road, more like a lane, which was leading away to a small village called Cold. And as they were driving along, they saw a very nice hotel, rather an old-fashioned looking hotel, which had shutters on the windows. So they pulled their car. There was an open area on the other side, one side of the road, where they parked their car, and then they walked across, and they went into the hotel, and they said, "Do you have 2 rooms for the night?" And he said, "Yes." The proprietor did speak some English, and he said, "Yes, I can put you up." So they booked 2 double rooms, one for each couple, and they noticed, one of the first things they noticed was that the windows didn't have any glass in them. They were just shutters which you could either open or shut. And the beds were extremely oldie-worldy in appearance and very high, so you couldn't actually sit on them without easing yourself up onto them. And with sheets and blankets and bolsters instead of pillows. Anyway, they undressed, and they had something to eat first, and they noticed they had. I think the men had something like steak and chips, and the women had egg and chips, and the food was brought out on very thick plates. They found it a bit unusual, charming nonetheless. And because they'd never been to rural France before, in which they were then, and so then they went to bed, and they had a shower in a very old-fashioned sort of bathroom, which had a metal bath, which had slats underneath it, through which the water poured or extracted itself when you turned the shower on.
Right.
Anyway, they did that, and then they got into these very tall beds, and they said, we fell asleep as soon as our heads touched the pillow, and the night seemed to go in about 5 minutes, and they were up again, waking up. So the night passed extraordinarily quickly, and they were very comfortable. They enjoyed it very much, and then the following morning, when they went to have some breakfast, they noticed a couple dressed in old-fashioned clothes come into the hotel. The woman wore lace-up black boots and a very long, down to the ground, down to her ankles anyway, dress, purple-colored dress. They could only remember that the man had a very thin moustache. Not much more about him, but and they were accompanied by two gendarmes who sort of came into the hotel after them, and they were dressed in very old-fashioned clothes. They could, but again they thought, well, we're in rural France. We don't know if this is how people dress and behave in normal France. And they got back into their car and they set off driving. And oh no, before they did that, they had to pay the bill, of course. And they were expecting to pay about 250 francs for the two rooms. And they were only asked for 19 francs. They thought, my goodness me, this is incredible. So they gave the proprietor a 20 franc coin and said, keep the change. And then they went off. And they went off and they got to Spain and they spent their week or so in Spain. And then when they were coming back, driving back, they thought, well, we'll stay in the same hotel again because it's incredibly cheap and very, very attractive place to be. And they got this, they came up the same Montélimar. They found this lane or small minor road, and they went down it, and they saw several buildings that they recognized from their first trip down it, but they couldn't find the hotel. They went back up a second time, and they went down it again. So 3 times they examined this road as carefully as they could, looking for the same hotel where they would love to have stayed again and couldn't find it. The only thing that they noticed was what appeared to be the bottom part of walls where an old building might have stood, which appeared to be in the very place where the hotel was. And but they couldn't do anything else because the hotel was no longer there anymore. And so they came when they got back to England. They wrote a piece for a local paper. No, I think it was a Dorset paper, Dover paper, I beg your pardon. And it was picked up, and Yorkshire Television made a television program about it. And Yorkshire Television took them back to the road, and they still couldn't find the hotel. You know, and they must have been looking very seriously for us. They wanted to find it because they'd taken it, for goodness sake.
Right. I mean, why would
it couldn't be found at all.
You'd want to go back and try to find something
fairly
like
large
that.
buildings where their hotel had been. You certainly would, but they couldn't find it at all. So they seem to have had, unbeknownst to themselves, they had no idea it was happening. They didn't notice anything different about. There was no sort of strange feeling or anything within them. They just suddenly drove into the past, and they looked into it on Yorkshire Television, and they determined that the hotel had probably dated from the first decade of the 20th century. So about 1900 to 1910.
That's nuts. But there was nothing there. They stayed there. They were a part of that. They lived there. You would think, though, what's interesting is that the money has changed, the look of money. And if they were paying in current day francs, what did they think when they got that money? Did it make any kind of effect? That's always the one aspect that leaves people kind of leaves me hanging when it comes to that.
Well, that's right. I wondered about that myself. Didn't they notice any difference in the money? But I think I spoke to one of the ladies, and I said, Didn't the proprietor of the hotel say, what have you given me here? But he took it without second thought and just dropped it into the till. Because I presume that the money in 1979 probably wasn't all that different from the franc pieces or the 20 franc pieces that was available in the early years of the 20th century.
Right. Well, it could be. Right. You don't know what are we really running into, and how is it being perceived by the people of the time? Was it as strange for them? But it would be great to find that they kept a journal or anything of that time to share, and see if people, if they talked about this weird experience with these two strange people that came in and, came and went without leaving it behind. And I've heard claims like this, Mr. Davies, and they're always anecdotal. They're always, oh, that's interesting. You're taking the word of a stranger. So I understand, there could be mistakes. There could be mental deficiencies and issues. I know a friend of ours shared a photograph. They were staying in this hotel. They woke up one morning, noticed it was a lot darker in their hotel than it had been. They opened up the window, and there was a building right next door that was blocking sunlight from their room. And they're like, I don't remember that. And they took a picture, and the building was there. And when they went outside, there was no building. They went back up and opened their curtains. There's no building there, but it looked like a newer modern building. But they have a photograph from the room and looked around. There was no other buildings anywhere. So it wasn't like they were on a different side of the building and took it. They were completely confused. And they're like, we asked, a building like this has never existed there. People are so trapped in the concept that time travel only occurs going backwards. But in some of these instances, were they seeing a glimpse of the future of a building that would be there at some point?
Yes, could well have happened to them, because people do have time slips into the future as well as the past. I know myself one night when I was living in this North London area.
Well, I'll tell you, hold on one second. Let me do this. We're going to take a quick break. We'll come back and hear your story and more. Time slips, journeys into the past and the future. Rodney Davies, our guest. We'll be back with more of the best in paranormal talk radio. I'm Dave Schrader. That's Tim Dennison. This is Darkness Radio. Welcome back to the program. This is Darkness Radio. We have a link for our guest's book on today's program guide, so make sure you check that out. Time Slips, Journeys into the Past and Future. All right, just before the break, Mr. Davies, you were about to tell us about another experience. Please, the floor is yours.
Yes, I was going to tell you, now one of the ladies I talked to for the book, who I called just Elizabeth to retain her anonymity. She lives in Malvern, in a town in Worcestershire. And one day she went to Worcester to do some shopping, and she spent a couple of hours. It was quite a busy afternoon, and it was at the time when she used to play music out into the street. So it was quite noisy, and there were a lot of people around, and she was looking for bargains and had a good ramble round. And then just before she decided to come home, she wanted to buy something nice for her dog to eat. She had a little dog which she'd left at home. And so she thought, I'll go into this shop. And it was a shop in an area called the Shambles. It was a sort of corn chandler type shop. And she went into it, And she was surprised to notice that there was a room right ahead of her which she hadn't seen before. It wasn't a shop she'd been into very many times in the past, but she'd been in there sufficiently well to notice that she'd never seen this room before. So she went into it, and it was quite a large room, which had quite a tall mahogany counter, which had an old-fashioned type mahogany cash register standing upon it. And behind it sat a plumpish middle-aged woman, dressed in a fairly long dress, who was busily knitting. And so she had a look round, and there were sacks of grain, and there were a few items on shelves behind this woman. But she noticed, strangely, that there weren't that many items, and none of them had any particular noticeable colouring about them. They were all fairly muted in the wrappings they had. But anyway, she said to the lady, she said, "Excuse me, I want to buy something for my dog." And, I want something that will give him some joy. And she immediately reached up above her and brought down a little leather rat, which had a card attached. And the rat was made of very fine leather, and it was quite well shaped in the so it was recognizably a rat with a tail, leathery tail, and ears which stuck up like rats do. And it was filled, amazingly enough, with raw pieces of meat. So as soon as she saw it, she thought, yes, that would be the ideal thing for my dog. And on the card, it had, not written, but stamped, rawhide rat, and its cost was only 6pence. So she thought, well, I'll certainly take that. My dog will love it. So she gave the woman a 6pence and went out, feeling very happy about that. And eventually got home, and she said the dog absolutely loved playing with and eating the rat. And she thought to herself, well, next time I go into Worcester, I'll buy him another one. Well, about a month went by before she was able to do that. But anyway, when she did get back to the shop, first thing that she noticed was that there was no room in which this middle-aged lady who was serving sat. It had completely gone, and there was a wall there instead. So she went into the rest of the shop, in which she hadn't been in before, and said, what's happened to the room that was just round here? And the young lady said, I'm sorry, I've never heard of it. I don't know anything about that room you're talking about. And she called another employee over, who was a chap, and he said, no, there's no room there. I've never seen it. So she was wondering what on earth was going on. But so then she said, do you at least still sell rawhide rats? And so, no.
Really?
We certainly
that wasn't a big seller for them?
They would never be allowed. We'd never be allowed to sell raw things like that with raw meat inside. So she went back absolutely amazed by the whole scenario that she'd been through. So no rawhide rats, I'm afraid. So don't look for any more stuff.
Right. So if this is, you're having these type of experiences, and people are seeing these things for themselves, experiencing, and sometimes bringing the pieces back from the past or the future.
Yes.
I mean, that's pretty remarkable evidence. Have you seen much in the way of evidence brought back from one of these time eras that seemed too new, too fresh, that it had to have come like something immediately, which means that time travel did happen?
Well, now with regards to that lady, she always regretted throwing the rawhide rat card away because she didn't think anything particularly special about it. She had no idea that it had come from the past. And she threw the card away, and of course it was dumped with the rubbish next time the collectors came by. And she said, I really regret getting rid of it. But now, have I seen anything? Well, I'm not sure. I've seen a policeman's 60-year-old or 70-year-old uniform that he was wearing at the time, but whether he'd had a time slip, I really can't be absolutely certain to say he had. I think he must have done, but for all I know, he might have been some chap who decided to dress up in a police uniform he already had and was just standing there. But no, I mean, the only things that we have from the past are things which have remained in the present that we've been in and have come along with us, so to speak, or which we've found bought in a shop, or which we've bought in a shop.
Do you believe that in this is going to seem like kind of an odd question, but with a time slip, do you believe that a physical object can be brought from one part of that time slip to another? Like physical things can be brought back and forth?
Well, yes. That lady had picked up a physical object which had been made some years before, in the time that room belonged to. That had made somehow the room in which she was had made a time slip into the modern world inhabited by Elizabeth, the woman from Malvern.
But then does it maintain its integrity? And does it change the timeline of where we are now? So let's say I'm in this timeline here and I slip into a past timeline and I recover, let's say, a sheriff's star and I bring it back with me. Does that change either timeline? Do you surmise?
No, I think you can certainly do it. And I don't think, no, because if you had been back into the Wild West and had picked up, well, it had given to you a sheriff's star,
mm-hmm.
and you brought it to our present, it would maintain itself. Obviously, it would maintain itself because you would be able to hold it out and say, here's a sheriff's star. But now Elizabeth, this lady I just mentioned,
mm-hmm.
she had another experience when one night she said, I put my children to bed. My husband was away working in London that day, and I was just sitting in my chair reading a book. And suddenly I got to this rather innocuous paragraph and I felt a jerk as though I'd been pushed forward from the chair. And she said, I next found myself standing in a room which was round in shape. Well, the wall was round in shape and then went up to a sort of meeting place above, which consisted of pieces of stonework which were not cemented together, and that there was a slit-like window through which she could see numerous trees and bird song that was very loud of birds singing in them. And then she said, I looked across the room and I saw a young man sitting on a sort of bench, and he was looking at me with absolute terror. Because, and then she said, I found myself back in my living room in Malvern. So for a few short seconds, it appears that she'd been time slipped back probably maybe 1,000 years, something like that. Certainly to medieval time, and found myself in the presence of this poor young chap. She said, even today I feel guilty about and sorry for scaring him so much. But of course, that's what would happen if suddenly somebody manifested next to you or in your studio. You would be alarmed and then disappeared again. Just disappeared again. But if you were sitting in your living room at home and suddenly this person just manifested out of thin air, it would be extraordinary.
Oh, I've had a couple of instances where there have been people that I've been near or around, and then they know how weird that is, because I know they were flesh and blood. They were human. This wasn't a ghost. This wasn't an illusion. It was there. And I saw them and then just gone like that. Do you know you've done so much research on this. Are there any cases of people in the past that have popped up claiming to be from the future that ended up being stuck somewhere in the past?
People who've come from the future and have manifested in our time, are you saying?
Well, meaning like, as we look through history, right, there's oftentimes that a stranger is found without memory or making strange claims, and, they're just kind of out of place, out of time. Yeah. I just wonder if they've ever taken a look at those people and then looked into current day to see if any of the people that have vanished, like in the last, 40, 50 years, match the description of any of these people that suddenly appeared 100 years ago, to see if there's any correlation. Have you ever found anything like that?
No. Thinking just rapidly through what I was dealing with, I don't think so, best of my knowledge. But a lot of people, one of the most interesting things is that ordinary manufactured items have been found fossilized in rocks. Now there was a case that did come from the United States, which I happened to come across quite recently, which I think you might have heard of, Dave, which was when this hammer head and part of the handle of the hammer was found in limestone rock.
Right. Yes.
Quite a few objects of that sort have been found fossilized in rocks, in sedimentary rocks, of course, limestone and chalk and things like that. I think I mentioned in my book, in fact, that a couple of nails have been found in pretty good condition, which must have been, if they were time slipped back that far to the Cretaceous period or earlier, many, many, many millions of years ago, they've been time slipped back enormous distances. And but the most amazing thing is that human footprints have been found impressed in rocks which were laid down tens or sometimes hundreds of millions of years before human beings evolved. Now, quite a few footprints have been found like that. quite a number from the United States, and in fact, I do devote a chapter to them in the book, which people may well be interested to read about, which does suggest that people can be time slipped back many, many millions of years. Now, of
God,
course,
could you imagine that nightmare? Could you imagine? Could you imagine just something happens, you slip through in your, dinosaur era, whatever? Just first of all, the disease, whatever might have existed back then, the harsh environments, not knowing what to eat or I can't even imagine what that would be like.
Well, I thought of myself, God, one night when I'm lying in bed thinking, God, if I was time slipped back then in my pajamas without any shoes on, it would be a double nightmare. Oh dear me! But it can and it has happened. That's the thing. Now, how it happens, we don't know at this moment, but it certainly does. And all the people that do go missing every year, some may well have been time slipped, either into the past or into the future. Now, of course, we can't tell if they went into the future because we haven't got there yet. And in fact, we never will, because we ourselves live in a constant present. But it may well be that they have done that.
So strange with this type,
very strange,
right? Yeah, and to hear these claims coming from people that, I'm sure you've heard a lot that some of them you kind of have to dismiss, and some that maybe are on that kind of borderline of sounding just too crazy to be true. But what would it sound like if you had that experience? That's got to be the strange delineation line for us as researchers, right? Is what is too absurd to be believed, and if it is to be believed, wouldn't it be absurd anyway? It's that's the challenge of looking into these things.
That's right. But the thing is, I think that the time in which we live is not as set in stone, if we can put it that way, as we seem to think it is. That our everyday world is far more fluid and movable than we give it credit for. And that we can indeed be either slipped back into the past or back into the future. And because the past, this would apply also to the future, but we can't really talk too much about the future because we haven't got there yet. If we ever do, but into the past, we know that millions upon millions upon millions of years have gone by. Many people, in fact, the thousands I believe you mentioned, might have been taken back into the past, and no sign of them will ever, unless they're fortunate or unfortunate to be fossilized, we won't ever know anything about them because they're gone, and presumably, in many cases, they won't come back.
Right. Now that there are more research abilities out there with newspapers.com and all of these other resources, I tell you, I'm just going to up all of my subscriptions and spend a week just deep diving into cases of missing persons and persons that appear out of time and place and see if there are any of these cases, and can we match the imagery, the look of them to these pieces of the puzzle of contemporary missing people and people appearing in the past.
Yes. I think that would be a good idea.
The frightening thing would be to think, we look at things in a certain context. Yeah. You and I walk out of the building and there's a sweet shop across the street, and you and I go in and buy sweets, and they're really low priced and the people look old timey, and you leave. That's one concept that's strange. But what if you're thrown back in time and you're in a place that when you're thrown back in time, there is a structure there when you arrive? Do you appear inside the structure safely, or do you appear in the wall of the structure, depending on where you were situated when the time slip occurred?
Yes. I would hope that we won't be immured in the wall, because we certainly wouldn't know too much about it. Hopefully, whatever is causing us to move is reasonable enough to move us away from solid objects, which we otherwise might manifest in. But I have no idea if that always happens.
Here would be the other aspect of the problem of time travel that I see, because if you're bending time to your will, right? If this can happen, our place in the universe is different now than it was 50 years ago, 10 years ago, 5,000 years ago, a million years ago. By time travel, are we truly, I don't know if you're following me on this concept, but, is time travel affected by the gravitational pull of the Earth as well? So does that mean if you time travel, will you stay attached to the planet as it was, or are you being thrown back to a different location in time and space? It's all so confounding to me, because again, if you theoretically think that it wouldn't just be time travel, it would also be a sense of space travel, because we existed in a totally different place as space expands and the universe continues to build.
That's right. But I can't really answer that question for you, Dave.
No, I know. It's just one of those that we throw out there of, the thought of these things. And, now you said you've seen the policeman from the past, but you also believe that you saw a pterosaur. Is that right?
Yes. At least I think I did. I can't be absolutely certain.
Okay.
But I did see some flying creatures in the air on more than one occasion. When again, I lived in North London.
Right.
And the thought to myself at the time, they look as though they could be pterosaurs or pterodactyls, sort of gliding around in the distance. So I was never able to get to the place where they were flying to make myself sure that that is what they were. So that's all I can really say about the pterosaurs.
But you saw these, and they did not look like any current bird that you've ever seen. They looked that big, leathery, dinosaur-like look. Were there any other eyewitnesses in and around that area that have seen this type of phenomena? Because you wonder, again, if it pops up, does it pop up often?
Well, I used to see them mainly when I went out for a walk on my own. But I have asked other people if they've ever looked into the air, into the distance, and said, "Can you see the pterodactyls that I can sometimes see?" But none of them have said they could. So I can only say it's something which has happened to me on a few occasions, and in one particular area of North London, above which pterosaurs may well still be flying. But not everybody, of course, would see them, because those creatures that once flew in that area of sky are still flying in that area of sky. In other words, the fact that they once were there means that in a very real sense they are still there, because the whole of what we call time, that is our past and our future, exists, I think, together as one continuum, so that the dinosaurs that once moved through my house or the place where this building is standing on will still be moving there. And could you but have the necessary mental wherewithal to see them, you could still see them now.
Well, that's the whole concept of this, right? We don't know how this time slip phenomena works. Have you, I'm curious in examining these cases, unfortunately, people aren't thinking about it at the time, but it would be interesting to know, was it a night of a full moon? What was the barometric pressure like? Was there solar flare activity recorded that day? Do we start seeing any kind of correlation between scientific data and when these phenomena are most likely to occur? Have you noticed any of that in your research?
I can't say that I have, because normally this sort of information isn't recorded, or it seems particularly relevant at the time.
Right. Because they don't even really realize it till sometimes hours or days later that things are not what they should have been.
Well, that's right.
Huh. Now, you said that you saw a craft that seemed futuristic as well. I know in the notes and pre-discussion for the show. Can you talk to our audience a little bit about that?
Yes. Well, if you've ever seen early examples of rockets, say the rockets the Germans used to fly up over to England during the war, they had a cylindrical shaft and then a pointed top. Can you imagine what I'm saying?
Right. Yes, I'm with you.
Most rockets are similar to that, but I think more modern rockets have bits attached to them, and so the shape isn't quite the same. But one night, I remember looking out of my window. I think I must have got up and just was looking out the window in the darkness of the night, and I saw this craft. It was going horizontally across the sky, and it was moving quite slowly, of the shape that I've just described, and it was pretty large, but I can't tell you exactly how large it was, because it was far away and quite high in the sky, but it was moving across the sky, and I watched it, and I thought, what on earth is that? And I had no idea at all. And I asked people in the following days if they'd seen anything like that. Well, of course, most of them hadn't, because they'd been asleep at the time. But and it was partly lit, as though it had a glow within it, or it had been lit up by the street lamps below, and it just moved across the sky and then disappeared. Most peculiar. And I could only think that it must have been some futuristic flying machine that I had happened to be lucky enough to see at the time it was happening, and that it was something from the future. But of course, I've no idea whether it was from the future or not. But
Right.
It seemed like that to me.
I love opening minds to these concepts and making people reassess what they think they know about the world around us. Do you think that a lot of people are dealing more with time, and is it maybe even unwinding? Is that why we're having so many different type of phenomena taking place at this point in history?
Well, I'm not sure about unwinding. It's been acting peculiar for many years, hasn't it? In fact, it's always had an oddity and a mystery about it. But whether we're perhaps more aware of these changes, which might be true now because people have more time to think about such things, and the more access to all these modern electronic devices that you mentioned earlier. So, yes, these things, I think, probably are more frequently than they did in the past. So
Agreed.
People are more generally aware of these things, I would say, Dave.
Mm-hmm. Fascinating stuff. Rodney Davies, our guest, Time Slips, Journeys into the Past and Future. It is a deep dive into these concepts, outlining the different histories, stories, missteps in history, the strange findings that have been located, and different concepts. I challenge you all, pick up the book, read it. Make sure you rate and review these books as well, because it goes a long way to help out our authors so that our type of genre continues to grow, folks. As long as you guys are out there buying and rating and reviewing books, then booksellers, publishers, and locations like Amazon are going to continue to look for this type of stuff. So make sure you get the book and visit. And Mr. Davies, thank you so much for taking some time out of your day to spend with us here and share with our audience. We've appreciated it.
Well, I've enjoyed talking to you, Dave, and thank you very much for having me on your program. Thank you very much.
It has been our pleasure. Folks, there is no live show tonight. Again, just to remind you, there's no live video stream tonight. I am at the Belvoir Winery in Liberty, Missouri. We're doing a Strange Escapes event. There are tickets, a few still available. If you're interested in attending, you can find information at darknessevents.com. That's darknessevents.com. Come on out, be a part of us. Don't just sit back and listen to the paranormal. Become part of the paranormal. Come on out and investigate the Belvoir Winery, the Oddfellows Asylum with us this weekend. That's it for Tim. I'm Dave. You've been listening to the best in paranormal podcasting. This is Darkness Radio.